Ivy Valentine subscribes to Mark Yoon, so should you. Enjoy your treat!
Should SoulCalibur change, or isn't in need of a major overhaul / major change? Is that why I can't play with the big boys? That's what we're actually going to talk about today. I get comments like this all the time. I've got a few recently that actually irritated me. I'm not going to be showing those comments like I usually do, even with their names like cropped out, just because like I don't want to call anybody out specifically, because it's super easy to go to the comment section of that video and to see who's saying what. So I'm just going to talk about generally, and the person probably knows who they are based on the arguments I'm making anyway, so there's no further need to go into that. I've seen a lot of people that think that they have the right idea about why SoulCalibur doesn't sell as much as the other ones, and they tend to make arguments based on other games that are in relatively the same category as them. I would argue they're not even in the same category. Games such as Mortal Kombat and Tekken and things of that nature. When it comes down to it, they'll make arguments like it needs like a mature rating, we need blood and gore, we need like a bunch of all these other things that like the other games are known for. And that's pretty much stripping the identity away from SoulCalibur. Hyper-realism is another one I hear a lot often too. It's like, it needs to be hyper-realistic. If you look at all these game trailers recently, and you look at a lot of the games recently, the ones that stand out the most are the ones that are stylized, not the ones that are hyper-realistic. And that's not because like there's a uncanny valley effect, or it just doesn't get it right, or graphics haven't come far enough. It's mainly because like the identity of the project is built within the art itself. Like the game is art, right? You take it as such, you perceive it as such, that's what it is. So when you take a game like SoulCalibur, for example, who has a heavy emphasis on Japanese style cartooning and animation and anime, when you add hyper-realism to that, what you're doing is stripping away the only identity that game has, and instead of giving it a chance to fight alongside the big dogs, what you're actually do is putting it below them by saying that they're trying to emulate them, instead of standing on its own as its own thing. SoulCalibur has always been one of the fighting games that actually stands on its own to try and do its own thing. I made a video before talking about how SoulCalibur is an innovator. They do things very, very well and consistently, and they roll features in without too much detriment to their actual overall gameplay. I will say that Reversal Edge is the exception to that rule, and I hope it gets nerfed in the next game or taken out completely. SoulCalibur needs very little things to actually succeed. What it needs is a proper budget and good marketing, but the only way to actually get good marketing and get a good budget is if the game sells well. So it's a catch-22, right? Because investors aren't going to pay money for a game that they think is only going to sell 2 million copies. They're not going to give it the budget of something that has like, let's say 10 million copies. It's just not going to happen because they're not going to get their money back. They're going to automatically lose money, and they know that. It's just simple math. I will say that there are overall improvements that they could do. I've hosted many polls on my channel recently talking about what people think that they should put more money into. Overall, a lot of people keep on saying that they need to be in production value. I think that's great if you have the extra money to put into production value, but I think the core tenets that you need to get down first is the gameplay, the netcode, and things like that. Like, if the game doesn't play and you can't play it, then like it doesn't matter how good it looks. It doesn't matter how good of a polished turd you have, it's still going to be a turd, right? I don't want to go out here and say that like nobody should ask for what they want of a game. You shouldn't say, you should always criticize the things that you love to make them better. That's always my forefront thought. That's always what I tell people to do. Don't just blindly shill for something. Like if you want to see something get better, then criticize it. Also, adding gore to a game like SoulCalibur isn't going to make it sell well, it's going to make it sell less. Slapping a mature rating on anything is going to limit who can actually purchase that product, because you're automatically making it 17 or older in most countries, and some countries won't even like carry it. So you're automatically limiting people that can actually potentially buy the product. So making it T or making it for everybody is usually the way to go, especially with smaller titles, because more people have access to it, more people are going to enjoy it, and you don't necessarily need gore to make anything look cooler. That's like kind of Mortal Kombat's thing, and maybe Killer Instinct, so like let those two have that, let those two thrive and do that on their own. I want SoulCalibur to be its own thing. I've also heard people say that like they need to strip away the character creation. I think that's complete garbage, because half of the player base is only here for the character creation, and the other half is made up of the FGC and people that want to compete in the game, people that want to be competitive and play online and ranked and stuff like that. So you have a game that's for like a hybrid audience. It's for single players and for multiplayers, which is actually doing a really good balance of doing that if you look at it from an objective standpoint. And stripping that away and turning it into an online only game is going to do the same thing that SoulCalibur 5 tried to be, which is why it failed. Well, one of the many reasons why it failed, but that just goes to show you want it to be its own thing and stand on its own two legs. SoulCalibur needs an overall direction. I agree with that. Project Soul is a very small team with characters and developers that shift constantly. Directors, producers, they're constantly shifting for every game. They even shut down after 5 and got restarted up. And now Motohiro Okubo went to another project. He's just a producer, so it's not that detrimental to it. The core team is intact, and as long as they keep the same vision and get in a director or the same director that actually understands the vision, then I think we'll be fine. Like I said before, it really comes down to budget, and it's not so much what they need to change or adjust about the game as its overall presentation value. It's about how they can market it to more people. It usually comes down to marketing. This means we need to get it to the forefront of events. We need to get it to the forefront of, esports and things of that nature. But the way we do that is not by strictly throwing everything that makes SoulCalibur away and focusing only on the competitive aspect. What we need to do is highlight why the game should be competitive and then also highlight why it's not. That way the two can marry and completely appease both sides of the fence, and more eyes are going to get shown from it being on shows and whatnot. That doesn't say that I want the single player experience to be dwindled at all. We do need more balance for certain things, especially in SoulCalibur. You get characters like Nightmare who have free bursts and plus on blocks and things that are really crazy compared to other characters. And yes, he's supposed to be a Bosch-ist type character, but then when it comes to ranked, people don't want to play against those characters, because when you go on ranked, all you really see is Nightmares and Astaroth, and those are, you got the grappler character like usual, and then you got the boss character, and it's not fun when you go online and there's the only characters that you're playing against. Of course you can learn to play against them, that's neither here nor there, I don't want to get into that, but just suffice to say that when you're criticizing SoulCalibur, as you should, I'm not saying you shouldn't, but when you're criticizing SoulCalibur for why it doesn't sell the way that it sells, you need to look at the overall picture and not just compare it to its brothers and sisters. That's just how that works. In fact, if you look at the numbers for Tekken, Tekken's never done that much better than SoulCalibur, period, except for the most recent iteration of Tekken. And that's because the game came out in 2015. So we're talking about almost a decade of this game accumulating sales numbers, being on the forefront of tournaments, being pushed, being marketed. Of course it's going to hit those accolades. It's actually surprising to me that it did hit those accolades, because usually Tekken is usually in the same 2 to 3 million ballpark that SoulCalibur sits. So the fact that this blew up is crazy to me. And before you go comparing that directly to SoulCalibur as well, SoulCalibur went on a huge hiatus after SoulCalibur 5, and it didn't have that 6th iteration that Tekken was actually building up an audience with. And in the last generation, when we're talking about specifically the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, having that in the early stages would have really helped SoulCalibur as a brand a lot. It came in towards pretty much the end there. It came out in 2018. So we're only talking about a few years away from the PlayStation 5 coming out, and that really was a detriment to it, I believe, especially now not making a PlayStation 5 version and keeping it to the forefront. Even though they're probably working on SoulCalibur 7 right now, I just want to make sure that when you're commenting or when you're talking amongst each other, when you're on the Discords, when you're chatting with anybody, just remember to look at the overall picture and not just compare it to other games, because SoulCalibur is SoulCalibur, and we love SoulCalibur because it's SoulCalibur. We don't love SoulCalibur because it's Mortal Kombat, we don't love SoulCalibur because it's King of Fighters, we don't love SoulCalibur because it's Tekken, and remember, SoulCalibur still sells pretty well. 2.5 million copies is not a bad shake. 3 million copies is not a bad shake, especially when you compare it to other lauded games. Look at Guilty Gear, look at Under Night in Birth, look at any other fighting game that's not part of the major sets, and they do 300,000, 500,000 copies. So it still does pretty well. With that being said, guys, I'm going to bring this video to a close. Please like the video if you liked it, and I really hope that you subscribe to the channel to keep this content going, to motivate me to make more content like this. There's a description box, also has my Discord. You can feel free to come over there and chat. Any and all thoughts are always welcome in the comment section down below. And as I always say, guys, I love it. Thank you.
And thank you.